Rain slammed against the diner windows as if the sky were tearing itself apart. Inside, the flickering fluorescent lights cast shaky reflections across the worn formica tables. Tables that had collected decades of stories, secrets, and late-night conversations. It was near closing time, that quiet hour when the world feels muted, and everything seems to settle into a slow exhale. But tonight, the silence felt different. It felt charged, as if destiny itself had slipped inside and taken a seat. In the corner booth, an elderly man sat in a metal wheelchair, wrapped in a thin blanket that did little to shield him from the storm he'd wandered through. His frail body was shivering. His eyes were unfocused, somewhere between confusion and exhaustion. Beside him, a young waitress named Mara carefully lifted a spoonful of hot soup to his lips. Her hands were trembling with hours of unceasing work, but her face held nothing except gentle concern. She had no idea that at that very moment, someone who would change her life forever was stepping through the door of the diner, a billionaire named Rowan Hale. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet moments where humanity shows its true strength, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Real Kindness Stories. And before we continue, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Mara had been running on fumes for weeks, fighting to stay afloat after her mother's medical bills swept away everything she owned. She had no one left except a few memories, and the stubborn hope that someday life might stop hitting so hard. Even when her legs ached, and her vision blurred from a lack of sleep, she clung firmly onto a silent promise. No one under her watch would ever feel forgotten. So when she found the elderly man alone in the rain, disoriented and barely able to speak, she didn't hesitate. She guided him inside, wrapped him in the only extra blanket the diner had, and warmed a bowl of soup. Even though the kitchen had already closed for the night, she didn't know his name, his story, or his past. She only knew he needed kindness. Meanwhile, Rowan Hale had arrived at the diner for an entirely different reason. He wasn't running from the storm outside. He was running from the storm inside his own life. The boardrooms, the false smiles, the people who bowed to his wealth but never truly saw him. His whole world had become a polished cage. His father, Aldrich Hale, had once been the strongest presence in his life, a brilliant self-made businessman who taught Rowan the hunger for ambition. But through the years, illness had chipped away at Aldrich's memory, scattering it like leaves caught in a random wind. He had hired the best nurses, the best doctors, every expert money could find, but none of them could replace genuine human warmth. Panic had engulfed Rowan when Aldrich had wandered away from his private care facility that night. Hours of searching had finally led him to this small, forgotten diner on the outskirts of town. The instant Rowan stepped inside, dripping from the storm, he froze. There was his father, frail, silent, wrapped in a blanket that clearly didn't belong to him, sitting peacefully in a wheelchair. And the young waitress leaning over him wasn't rushing, wasn't frustrated, wasn't treating him like a chore. She was feeding him with the care of someone who understood what it meant to be human. Rowan watched as his father's trembling slowed, his expression softened, and a warmth returned to his features that Rowan hadn't seen in months. He wasn't comforted by the soup. It was Mara, her presence, her patience, her heart. The painful realization hit all at once. Money could buy treatment. It could buy staff. It could buy efficiency. But compassion, that was something no amount of wealth could purchase. When Mara finally lifted her head, she didn't recognize him. She didn't see the billionaire. She didn't see the magazine covers. She simply saw a worried man standing at the entrance, soaked to the bone. She had no idea who Rowan Hale was, but she was about to find out why fate had brought him into her life. Mara didn't see a billionaire standing in the doorway. She didn't recognize his face from magazines or headlines. All she saw was a frightened son. She promptly apologized for stepping in without permission, explaining that she found the old man outside in the rain, shivering and confused, and simply couldn't leave him there. Her voice quivered, afraid she had overstepped, or might be scolded. But instead of anger, Rowan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, pure admiration. He noticed the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the way her hands still shook from the long shift. And yet, despite her own struggles, she opted for compassion without hesitation. In her humble act of care, she'd given his father something no amount of money had managed to buy in months. Dignity when the storm had finally softened. Rowan helped Mara wheel Aldrich out to the luxury car he had arrived in. Still, it wasn't until he watched her tuck the blanket tenderly around his father that Rowan realized he didn't want this encounter to end. Not until he understood the woman whose kindness reached deeper than medicine ever could. Inside the diner again, in the quiet after the storm, Rowan poured late-night coffee for Mara. He had called a caregiver to sit with Aldrich in the car. She was slow to begin talking about herself, but he wasn't pushing her. He just listened. An unheard of thing. From her standpoint, slowly, she opened up. She spoke of the medical bills that swallowed her savings, of caring for her sick mother right to the very end, of losing almost everything except her stubborn determination to keep going. She didn't complain or ask for pity. She even tried, smiling through it, but Rowan could hear the exhaustion behind her words, the weight she had been carrying alone far too long. Something in Rowan shifted that night. For years, he had lived among people who saw only his wealth, people who flattered him, or used him, or wanted pieces of his empire. But here, in a tiny highway diner with flickering lights and chipped tables, he saw something rare, a richness having to do with nothing related to money. A simple, powerful goodness expecting nothing in return. For the first time in years, Rowan felt the need to act from his heart, not as a billionaire but as a human being. The next morning, before the sun was even up, Rowan was back in the diner. No cameras, no entourage, just purpose. He offered Mara a full scholarship to pursue the nursing career she had abandoned, after her mother's illness drained their finances. He paid off the debts that had been suffocating her. He even restored her late mother's home, what she had been forced to give up, so she could have a place that felt like hope again. And to make sure she was able to study without losing her income, he set up flexible hours for her at one of the medical facilities he owned. Mara was overwhelmed. She tried to refuse, insisting she didn't deserve such generosity. But Rowan insisted gently. This wasn't charity. This was gratitude. She'd shown his father compassion when he needed it most. She'd reminded Rowan what humanity looked like. He wanted to give her a chance to share that same kindness with the world. And then weeks turned into months. And with each passing month, Mara's life started to bloom in ways she had previously only dreamed. She tackled her studies with newfound fervor, now driven by purpose rather than desperation. Every late-night lecture, every chapter she read, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Aldrich's condition stabilized too, and anytime Mara visited him, he would brighten sometimes, recognizing her with a faint smile, small, hopeful moments that meant the world to Rowan. And Rowan himself changed too. He started spending more time with his father, reconnecting with the man he had always looked up to. He found again some of the tenderness he had buried beneath work and responsibility. Mara's kindness hadn't only touched Aldrich, she healed something inside of Rowan too, a simple act of compassion, which had rippled outward, altered all of their lives in ways that no one could ever have foreseen. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like the video, share it with someone who needs reminding that kindness still matters, and subscribe to Real Kindness Stories for more inspirational videos. As we wrap up, take a moment to tell us in the comments which moment moved you most. In a world that too often grows cold, one quiet act of goodness in a small diner on a stormy night became the spark that changed 3 lives forever.